Okay, this series is on the Jewish dietary laws. The word kosher is a vocab word. Make sure you have that in your notes. And before we hop into it too much, I want to speak first of all about the whole idea of dietary restrictions and dietary codes. If I were to put up two different foods, you might look at the one on the left and say, ugh, I don't want to eat scales. And you might look at the one on the right and say, yum, that looks like some great seafood. And if I showed you what was underneath each of them, they're both snails. Escargot is made out of land snails, and conch is made out of a sea snail. And if you think, well, I wouldn't want to have conch, but that stuff looked pretty good, think about the whole idea of fried clams. And clams are mollusks just like snails, and yet in some cultures, snails are prized as a delicacy, and other people look at it and say, bleh, and yet they're fine with eating other mollusks. Or to go a different direction, you might look at a very, very exotic dish like the Japanese uni, that's U-N-I, and say, ugh, that's really horrible looking. And you might even go a little further and say, when you find out what it is, it's sea urchin gonads, and think, I would never eat that. Why would people eat that? And yet people in India would look at Americans eating beef and think, you're out of your mind. Why would you eat cow? So every culture has its dietary restrictions or taboos or things that they prize. And so as we go in and talk about the Jewish dietary laws, keep that in mind, that we all have our dietary prejudices. And in chapter 11 of Leviticus, there's a codified description of the Jewish dietary laws. Chapter 11 begins with land animals. Speak to the Israelites and tell them, of all land animals, these are the ones you may eat. Any animal that has hoofs you may eat, provided it is cloven-footed and chews the cud. That phrase, chews the cud, often draws students' attention. Animals that chew the cud are grass eaters or plant eaters. And if you've ever seen a cow sitting out in the field or standing out in the field, it might be standing there just quietly, and then suddenly it begins chewing, and you wonder where it got the food from. It didn't bend down to get it. Well, what it might have done is regurgitated some partially digested grass that was in its stomach, and it chews it, it masticates it, breaks it down some more, and then swallows it, and then there's a chemical breakdown, and then it coughs it back up to break it down a little bit more physically, and it goes through these different stages of processing by the animal. And that's what it means to chew the cud. So animals that chew the cud are vegetarian animals. And specifically in verse 4, it says you can't eat the ones that only chew the cud or only have hoofs. For example, the camel chews the cud. It's an herbivore, but it doesn't have a cloven hoof. By the same token, a donkey or a horse chews the cud, but these two animals have solid hoofs. And the logic behind chewing the cud might be that we as omnivores or carnivores only eat vegetarian animals. We don't eat other carnivores or other herbivores or other omnivores. And the idea of the hoof might have something to do with your work animal, that a donkey or a horse has a solid hoof, or a camel has a pad, and those mean that they are work animals. So there are certain animals that are vegetarians, but you don't eat your work animals. Instead, it has to be an animal that has a cloven hoof, a split hoof. And if it has a split hoof, then it is edible. You can eat it. It is a clean animal. You can offer it as a sacrifice on an altar, or you can put it on your barbecue and serve it up for dinner. Down in verse 7, it mentions one of our favorite animals, the pig, which does indeed have hoofs and cloven hoofs, but does not chew the cud. Pigs are omnivores. Pigs will eat meat. Pigs will eat anything. They'll eat garbage. And so in the logic of the Jewish dietary laws, we're not permitted to eat it. As an aside, it's possible that people who ate pork back in the day, if it wasn't cooked enough, got a disease like trichinosis. And so the idea was, well, if you got sick from eating that, then obviously God didn't want you to eat it. So let me summarize this and tell you what you really need to know. I'm not going to put rock hyrax on the test. But on the menu, if it is a cow, if it is a goat, if it is a sheep, it's fine. I'm not going to give you anything tricky. I'm not going to say mutton, which is sheep, or I'm not going to say veal, which is baby cow. I will be very clear that it is beef, or it is lamb, or some other very clear description of a sheep or a goat or a cow. Verse 9 continues with the idea of seafood. Verse 9 says, "You may eat the following: whatever in the seas or in river waters has both fins and scales you may eat." So the rule is, if it lives in the water, it has to be a fish. It has to have fins and scales. And I'm not going to give you a lot of exotic fish names that you might know. Actually, instead of a Christian fish, we should have a Jewish fish, for those who get the joke. Anything that lives in the water has to look like a fish. It can't be all these different things that have legs and antennae and tentacles and things like that. Those are all considered to be unclean according to the rules of Leviticus. So no shellfish, no shrimp or crab or lobster or octopus or uni or conch or sea urchin gonads or anything else. It has to be a fish. As an aside, and this will not be on the test, you can't eat catfish because catfish don't have scales, they have a skin. And according to the Jewish dietary laws, whale would not qualify because it does not have scales. So fish is safe to eat, and not all these other things. Of the birds, these you shall loathe. They shall not be eaten. They are loathsome. The griffin vulture, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the falcon, the crow, the owl, the kestrel, the hawks, the owl, the cormorant, the owl, the osprey, the stork, the herons, the hoopoe, and the bat. Interestingly, that this mammal gets thrown in with the birds. I'm going to give you a general rule. If it eats meat, you can't eat it. So anything that eats, any bird of prey or anything that eats carrion cannot be eaten. Chicken are fine, ducks are fine, turkeys are fine, geese are fine, quail are fine. Any kind of bird that is a vegetarian. I will keep it simple. The various winged insects that walk on all fours are loathsome to you. But of the various winged insects that walk on all fours, you may eat those that have legs jointed above their feet for leaping off the ground. Basically, you can eat locusts, you can eat crickets, you can eat grasshoppers. And as I heard one scholar put it, back in the ancient world, one of the things that was most devastating to people was when a locust swarm came in and ate their crops. And if there really was a compassionate God who cared about the people, then that God would at least let the people eat the grasshoppers or eat the locusts that had devastated their food supply. It turns out that crickets and grasshoppers are actually pretty good food. They have fiber, they've got a little bit of protein, and they're fairly tasty. I will try to bring some roasted crickets to class so you can sample them. But grasshoppers, crickets, and locusts are all fine to eat. No beetles, no flies, no worms. You can eat the locust that destroyed your crops. Next screen. Of course, it's possible to eat any kind of vegetable, any kind of fruit, any kind of green leafy plant. That goes back to Genesis 1 with the idea that God originally intended us possibly to be vegetarians. This is a little bit of a shift of gears, but I want to talk about the Torah. That's a vocab word that you should expect on one of the upcoming tests. The Torah means the law, or the first 5 books of the Bible. Could also be called the Pentateuch, the 5 scrolls. Torah is a Hebrew word. Pentateuch is a Greek word. The first 5 books of the Bible, the core of the Jewish Bible, are the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, misspelled, I'm sorry, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And I want to focus here on Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and that misspelling is going to bug the heck out of me. The books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, if you put them together, describe the Israelites escaping from Egypt. Exodus 1 through 19 is the story of the Israelites under Moses escaping from the Pharaoh after 10 plagues are sent on the Egyptians. They come to Mount Sinai and make a covenant, and they stay there for the next 40 chapters, 20 chapters of Exodus and 30 chapters of Leviticus and 10 chapters of Numbers. So about 60 chapters they stay at Mount Sinai making a covenant. And then the story resumes with Numbers 11 through 36, in which they journey to the Promised Land. So the core of the Pentateuch, the inner workings of the Pentateuch, are the story of the Israelites escaping from slavery in Egypt, and then making a covenant with God, and then journeying to the Promised Land. And if you keep that visual in your head, the next slide will make sense. We talk about covenants, that there's God's going to do this, and Noah's going to do this. God's going to do this, and Abraham's going to do this. In the case of the covenant at Mount Sinai, what God has done for the Israelites is freed them from slavery in Egypt, worked the plagues on Egypt, and brought the Israelites out of slavery, and then brings them to the Promised Land. Those are 2 big events. God freed us from slavery. God brought us to the Promised Land. 2 huge things. And what is it that Israel can do in response to this great gift from God? What could Israel ever do to pay back God for freeing them from slavery and bringing them to the Promised Land? Well, it turns out that the center of the Pentateuch, the center of the Torah, the laws and the rules and the regulations are the ways in which the Israelites can pay God back. They can follow the kosher laws and the Sabbath laws. They can practice the Holocaust rituals. They can observe the holy days. That God has done these great things for us, and what we can do in response is to follow God's rules and regulations in all these details. They're not a burden. They're our chance to say thank you to God. And so what's going to be the sign of that covenant? Well, the sign of that covenant is going to be what we call the Decalogue. Deca, if you know what a decade is 10. Logos is the laws. The Decalogue is the 10 laws, the 10 commandments that symbolize the entire covenant at Mount Sinai. God freed us from slavery. God brought us to the Promised Land. And we have all these rules and regulations, 50 or 60 chapters, since my math was poor on the previous page, of laws and rules and regulations. And these 10 laws, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, these 10 laws act as the sign of the covenant. And where are we going to keep this Decalogue? Where are we going to keep these 10 commandments? We are going to keep them in a special vessel called the Ark of the Covenant, a special gold box into which we will put the tablets that have the 10 commandments on them. The word theophany, I will mention this later on when the Israelites come to Mount Sinai. There's lots of smoke and fire. Take a picture of your notes and submit it so that other students can do peer reviews.